Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some food tastes amazing and other times it is just okay, even if it is the same food? Today we're diving into how our brains process taste, and how things like how strong a flavor is or even what we expect to taste can totally change our experience. You know, tasting is a big deal in everything from judging wine to figuring out if your favorite snack is good quality. But it is not just about our tongues. Our brains play a huge role, using what we know and even what we expect to make decisions about what we're eating. It's like a detective story for your taste buds. So, scientists wanted to figure out how to separate the actual taste part from the decision part of tasting. They used a cool method called signal detection theory, which helps scientists understand how we detect things, especially when there's a lot of other stuff happening like background noise. Think of it like trying to hear a friend's voice in a noisy room. It helps them measure how good you are at actually sensing the taste. That is sensitivity, and how you decide if you tasted it or not, that is your decision criterion. To test this, they got 180 people, mostly young adults, to do some taste tests. These folks weren't professional tasters, so they were like us, everyday people trying to taste. They weren't allowed to eat or drink anything for a bit before the experiment, which is pretty standard for taste studies to make sure nothing messes with their taste buds. The experiment involved tasting mixtures. There was a noise mixture, which was mostly a lemony flavor. Then there was the signal noise mixture, which had the lemony flavor plus salt. They created two versions of this salty mixture, one with a little salt and one with a lot of salt. This was to see how the intensity of the salt flavor affected their tasting. They set up a bunch of different scenarios for the participants. Imagine these. First, the salt level either low or high. Second, they tried to influence people's expectations about how often they taste salt. Sometimes they made it seem like salt was rare, sometimes common, and sometimes equal. This is called manipulating the base rates, or how often you expect to encounter something. And third, some people got feedback after each taste, telling them if they were right or wrong, while others got nothing. The task for the participants was pretty straightforward. They were given a sample and had to say yes if they tasted salt, and no if they didn't. It's all about whether they could correctly pick out that salty taste when it was there, and crucially, not say they tasted salt when it wasn't. After everyone did their tasting, the scientists looked at the yes-no answers. They calculated how often people correctly said yes when there was salt. That's a hit. And how often they wrongly said yes when there was no salt. That's a false alarm. From these numbers, they could figure out the sensitivity, how good they were at detecting the salt and the decision index, how they were making their yes or no choices. Now, let's get to what they found. One of the big discoveries was about the intensity of the taste. They found that when the salt concentration was higher, people were just plain better at detecting it. Their sensitivity, that measure of how well they could sense the salt, went up. This happened no matter what we either told them to expect or whether they got feedback. So, stronger flavors are just easier for our brains to pick up on. But it gets more interesting when we talk about expectations and feedback. This is where things really heated up. They discovered that feedback, meaning telling people if they were right or wrong, had a big impact on their decision making. When people got feedback, they were much better at adjusting their yes or no answers to match how often salt was actually supposed to appear in the samples. If they were told salt would be rare, they became more careful about saying yes. If salt was common, they felt more confident saying yes. It seems like feedback helps us tune our decision-making to reality. Now, here is the kicker. When there was no feedback, things got weird. The relationship between what people expected and how they decided got flipped around. Instead of matching the actual chances of tasting salt, their decisions became less predictable and sometimes even went in the opposite direction from what was statistically expected. It's like if you were told it might rain, but you didn't get any weather updates. You might just start carrying an umbrella all the time, even on sunny days, just to be safe, even if it doesn't make much sense based on the actual weather. The study suggests that without feedback, people can't reliably adjust their judgment strategy to match the true probabilities of the stimuli presented. So, to sum up the main findings, intensity of the taste directly improves your ability to detect it. That's your sensory part. But feedback and your expectations, the stuff that makes up your decision-making, they interact. Feedback helps you use those expectations to make better, more informed decisions that align with what is actually happening. Without feedback, those expectations can lead you astray. This research really highlights how our sense of taste isn't just one thing. It's a combination of our sensory ability and our cognitive processes. The way they used the double dissociation additive test really showed this. Stimulus intensity, like how salty it is, only affected the sensitivity part, while the base rates, how often you expect something, and feedback affected the decision-making part. They operated separately, which is super cool for understanding how our brains work. What is really important here is the role of feedback. It seems crucial for sharpening our decision-making when it comes to taste. This means in food evaluation, giving clear feedback is key if you want accurate results. Especially if you're not dealing with trained professionals. For us as consumers, it also implies that our own expectations, without some way to check if they are accurate, can sometimes lead us to misjudge a taste. Now, this study was done in a lab with specific taste mixtures. It is not exactly like tasting a complex meal in a restaurant. Also, the participants were mostly university students. So, while the findings are super insightful, we can't automatically say they apply to everyone in every single tasting situation. More research could explore how different types of feedback, like maybe just telling people if their judgment was generally good or bad over a longer period, might affect things differently. Overall, this is a fantastic piece of research that peels back the layers of how we taste. It tells us that for better taste evaluation, understanding and managing both the sensory input, like intensity, and the decision-making input, like feedback and expectations, is key. It could help improve how we design taste tests, how we train tasters, and even how we understand our own everyday food experiences. It really shows that what we think we taste is as important as what we actually taste. Thanks for joining me on RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you enjoyed this deep dive into taste perception, please hit that like button, leave a comment with your own tasting experiences, and subscribe for more brain-boosting science. See you next time.